Hello everyone, my name is Sam and I am a late diagnosed autistic ADHDer, otherwise known as an AuDHDer. I previously did a video about how my ADHD hides my autism, which is part of the reason I believe that I was only diagnosed into my 30s. But today I want to talk to you about how my autism hides my ADHD. Now the two conditions are so related, but it wasn't until 2013 that dual diagnosis became possible because it was thought that if you had one diagnosis you couldn't possibly have the other. Since then we've discovered that in fact a lot of people do have both. So if you already have one diagnosis but aren't sure about the other one yet, when you're done watching this video, do go and watch that other video because I think it might be quite helpful for you. Like I've said before, when you have both, they can really appear to hide each other. But that doesn't make you any less valid as an ADHDer, it just means your problems, your needs are different, and you may not fully relate to one group or the other. I just want to say, when I'm on camera, my ADHD tends to take over. This is also scripted. I script my videos, which means that my brain doesn't have to think so much and I can concentrate on acting. But in real life, talking to people, the autistic side does kind of come out a little bit more. And that's even when I'm masking. So anyway, let's get into it. Every autistic person has a different expression of autistic traits. And obviously I have more autistic traits that I'm going to talk about in this video, but these are the ones that I think are relevant in the context of ADHD. So these are the need for order and routine, social difficulties, and I'll expand on that definitely a little bit later, pattern recognition, a preference for rationalizing thoughts and emotions, ability to absorb and make sense of a lot of information. And this is also where the crossover with giftedness comes into play, which is really a topic for another video, but I wanted to mention it now because I think it's quite interesting. So the need for order and routine. As someone who feels sort of completely chaotic inside most of the time, I've been told repeatedly throughout my life, like, you're so organized. And I'm like, thanks, it's a coping mechanism. So my own chaos causes me distress because fundamentally I love things to be ordered and organized, and yet I cannot do that. So a lot of my life has basically been like the odd couple dynamic, one side trying to kind of control and cajole the other side. And so when I see, you know, hashtag relatable ADHD content about complete chaos and stuff, I don't relate to that because one side of me is always trying to rein it in. And to be perfectly honest, I can't live like that. But what that means from the outside is that people only ever see the systems that autism has set up in order to control ADHD. And things still slip through the cracks anyway, but it doesn't make me look very ADHD. And making order out of chaos is a nice skill, for sure, but it needs to be done over and over again, and over and over and over again, because the chaos is always still fundamentally there. As you can imagine, that's very tiring. So let's talk about social difficulties now. And this is a really interesting one because I come across a lot of, you know, content like lesser known ADHD symptoms, and they're all actually autistic traits. But I think it's also interesting because you wouldn't think that something that you struggle with on the one hand is covering up something else that you struggle with from a different perspective. So a lot of autistic people mask, I definitely do, and this is for better or worse. And this often results in social situations. You manage around social situations by being hypervigilant. You're constantly scanning to see if you've kept up with the conversation or the mood of the room, or if people are responding to you right, and if you're doing a good job at socializing. It's exhausting. And this high alert for social mistakes system also happens to catch a lot of the ADHD stuff as well. You know, a lot of ADHD traits are also seen as less socially appropriate, like blurting out stupid shit that comes into your head. I don't always catch that myself, but I do feel that as a result of my autistic traits, I probably catch about 80% of the stupid shit that would have otherwise come out. And so the fear of making social mistakes, that fear has come about probably as a result of my autism, but that has also caused me to hold back on a lot of ADHD traits, such as talkativeness, because when I unmask or after a couple of glasses of wine or something, I really struggle to stop talking, and I know that people don't always appreciate that. Why do you think I have a YouTube channel? But for me, well, for everyone, alcohol is something that lowers inhibitions, and for me, it lowers my mask. I think that's also part of the reason why it can be quite appealing to a lot of us. So once I let out both the autism and the ADHD in a social setting, and this is a true story, you know, I will corner strangers and have intense political conversations with them, sometimes for hours, and that fulfills my need to not stop talking and also my need to info dump on certain topics. And if you're sitting here watching thinking, that sounds pretty good, actually, that sounds kind of like a fun party, then maybe you're one of us. And I just briefly wanted to mention something else regarding the social stuff, which I thought about as I was writing the script. Now, I've had a lot of ADHD friends in my life, a lot of whom undiagnosed, but I find myself drawn to ADHDers for friends because I think that's fulfilling some kind of a social need for me. But I've also noticed that autistic people are very drawn to me, and I don't know whether that's the case with anyone else, whether you recognize that dynamic. Maybe I just have an approachable face. But let me know if that's something that you find familiar or resonates with you, because I'm quite curious. So the next one we're going to talk about is pattern recognition, and I don't think this is something the average person would associate with autism, but I do think it's a pretty common autistic trait. You know, there's the stereotype, and in the DSM I think they even mention it, where it's this like weird obsession with strings of numbers like on number plates and stuff. I've always thought that was odd, because if you are good at pattern recognition, if that's a strength of yours, if you see them anywhere without really having to think about it, then you'll notice it without it being an obsession necessarily. So what's this got to do with ADHD? Well, among the criteria for ADHD diagnosis is something like makes a lot of careless mistakes. That's a lot of the reasons that you know, people might be picked up on ADHD. And I won't say that that never happens to me, but I think that it's easier to spot mistakes when you have an aptitude for pattern recognition. And so my own experience is that I will review things, sometimes obsessively beforehand, because I will catch the mistakes and because the autistic side of me can't abide mistakes. And that's, again, like, that's autism cleaning up ADHD's mess. But the thing is that they are both there, and the careless mistakes are being made, but they're also being caught and corrected. So it did occur to me while I was writing this, actually, that I am not very kind to the ADHD side of myself, and I've always felt more shame for my ADHD traits than for my autistic traits, and probably that's, you know, how I grew up. But I think it's worth examining that in yourself, thinking about which one you let out to play and which one you keep tucked tight inside. Where does the shame lie, and which is the one that you're actually okay with? Maybe there's shame for both of them. But I've noticed that for me there was a big imbalance there, and I definitely felt more shame and hid my ADHD traits more. And since I've noticed that when I honor my ADHD needs, which include social needs, I just feel happier and more regulated. And it is a constant balancing act. You know, I can't pretend that it isn't exhausting and hard, but life is too short to kind of continue to be cruel to parts of yourself that you just don't really like very much. So I think it's important to kind of examine that, you know, if you do have both, or if you do eventually get diagnosed with both. So, a preference for rationalizing thoughts and emotions. You may think that this is a stretch. What has this got to do with it? But let me rationalize this to you. I've made some very big and impulsive decisions in my life, which I did talk about in the previous video, but autism always comes along and rationalizes it. So, for example, I didn't move to the Netherlands because I was bored and wanted to change and made an impulsive decision. No, I have a long list of perfectly rational and reasonable reasons why I did that and why that was a good idea. And you can rationalize almost anything, even the bad decisions. So this isn't always a good thing, but it happens. But when these impulsive decisions come along, to other people, I can present a very reasonable case for why this is extremely well thought out, even if those justifications came to me after I'd already made that impulsive decision to just go for it. You know, then autism comes around and is like, actually, you know, there are some reasons why this is good, so let me tell you. So what this results in is not looking impulsive from the outside. And this also works with emotions too. As an ADHDer, you have a more volatile emotional landscape. That's a very nice way of putting it, I think. But I find you can really impress therapists by being so rational about it all. That was a joke. The therapists are not impressed by that. Yeah, that is something I tend to do, is rationalize emotions. And when you rationalize emotions, you think your way out of it. That's not necessarily healthy, but I think it can hide a little bit of ADHD. So up next is the ability to absorb and make sense of a lot of information. As I mentioned, this is also a trait of giftedness. The trifecta of autism, ADHD, and giftedness is a very interesting thing. But regardless of what part of me that trait comes from, this ability, having this ability, is why I made it through school and through university and through a master's degree, despite generally starting all my projects at the last minute. Eventually I did learn that this was very stressful for me. I think it was my master's degree where I really tried to be better at planning, but even then I did make a plan and I mostly stuck to it, but I didn't plan well enough, and I was still finishing off my master's dissertation the day that it was due. When you can do this, when you can understand information and very quickly put it all together and make sense of it, you may miss a few deadlines here and there, but the quality of your work is usually pretty good, sometimes exceptional. You know, I think I ended up getting a distinction on that dissertation that I felt like I was still just doing it all last minute. This is why teachers very often miss this, because if you're producing work of a high quality, you may seem a little disorganized, but overall your grades are good, so they don't care. And they often miss the fact that you're actually just motivating yourself with fear and urgency. And there's lots of people, even psychologists, diagnosticians, they still believe that you can't have ADHD because you did too well in school. And it's like, yeah, but the struggle was not an intellectual one, the struggle was an executive functioning one. It's quite a lonely place to be, realizing that you can know and understand a lot. You can know so much and you can really understand it and you really have a great grasp of it, but you still can't conform to the expectations of school and academia and society at large. Now, of course, I want to mention I wasn't on ADHD meds back then, and I do believe that they would have really helped me a lot, to be honest, with this particular issue. I think mainly my problem was starting projects and obviously having that momentum. And that was a very big problem for me throughout my life and is very much not a problem now.
I just want to mention quickly that for those of you who are in the early stages of your autism discovery, whether that's pre-diagnosis, post-diagnosis, as well as for those whom diagnosis is not available or accessible, I have developed a workbook to deepen your understanding of your autistic traits and try to make sense of all these thoughts and memories that come to you during this time. As well as breaking down the diagnostic criteria in a more relatable way, there are sections on masking and talking to other people about your autism, so check it out if that sounds like it might be useful to you or maybe someone you know. Now back to the video.
So the last thing I want to talk about is what hid my hyperactivity. So I don't have an official ADHD diagnosis with a subtype. Firstly, I don't need one in this country to access ADHD meds because I have the autism diagnosis. And I've also had 2 psychologists basically validate my ADHD, so I didn't really feel the need to get a diagnosis on top of that. And while people tend to say that girls tend to be more of an inattentive type than a hyperactive type, I don't think that is the case with me. I don't relate to this feeling of being dreamy and away with the fairies as much as just being very mentally hyperactive. But there is a relation to physical hyperactivity that I wanted to talk about, and how physical hyperactivity ends up managing or hiding a lot of your ADHD traits. So when I think about my childhood, I was a gymnast, and it was not just because, oh, I like gymnastics, so I'm going to take some classes. You know, it was because I was just naturally, you know, tumbling around most of the time. And there was a short period in my life where I was competing at a county level, as well as doing school gymnastics, as well as doing ballet, and we did sport every day at our school, which means that, you know, I was training gymnastics 7 times a week on top of all the other stuff that I was doing. And that was really, I think, very helpful to manage my hyperactivity. That was really a lot of sport looking back on it. Honestly, I swear, if we can harness the energy of ADHD kids, we can collectively reduce our dependence on fossil fuels overnight. Like, we just need to hook them up to some generators. There's like a perpetual motion machine inside each and every ADHD child, I'm sure of it. This level of physical activity was obviously probably quite unsustainable and did not last into my teens. So this was a combination of several factors. I probably also the increased demands on my autism, but also undiagnosed celiac disease, PCOS, and PMDD, which all contributed to having extremely low energy levels at times. I wasn't able to do that level of physical activity. And I think what happened was, as my physical energy dropped for all of these reasons, I wasn't able to channel my ADHD in a physical way. And so it became more of a mental hyperactivity. And right now, I'm exhausted from living. As you can probably hear, I'm recovering from a cold. I'm exhausted from raising kids too, and I don't have it in me to do the amount of physical activity that would probably help with my ADHD. I exercise 3 times a week, and I can pretty much stick to that. But to be honest, that isn't enough for my brain. Ideally, probably, my brain would probably want me to exercise every day. There's no way that I can keep up to that though. But this is why I think that ADHDers, exercise is very, very good for ADHD brains, because it stops the hyperactivity from going up to your head. So that's it for today. Let me know what resonated with you the most, if it did, and also whether you'd be interested about an additional video about the intersection of autism, ADHD, and giftedness. Don't worry, I'm very critical about the concept of IQ, but I think that giftedness is something interesting to discuss outside of just purely being an IQ thing. So don't forget to watch the other video if you haven't already seen that, and otherwise I will see you next time. Bye. Now the two when you have both, they can really affect. And so once I let out both the autism and the ADD, my cold's been getting worse and worse. This is the 3rd time I'm recording this, by the way.